1 month ago, there was a woman who lived alone. Suddenly someone knocked on her door. She slowly turned off the lights and the person tried to open the door. The woman seemed to know the person who wanted to come in because she was angry and didn't want to meet him. She wanted the person not to bother her anymore because she had contacted the police. When she opened the door of her house, there was no one and suddenly a creature came quickly and the woman fell from the window of her house. Then, at the bus station, a suspicious man entered a bus. He seemed to be hiding from someone. Suddenly a police detective entered the bus and asked all passengers to get off the bus for a moment, but the woman who's sitting in the front didn't get off. And the suspicious man didn't want to get off. Then the detective approached him. The detective said someone died in a villa. The woman who lived alone died of shortness of breath. And there was a fire there. It was a case of arson and the detective suspected the man was the perpetrator. The man didn't answer. He was actually surprised to see a shabby woman who seemed to be a victim of the fire. Then the detective arrested the man.
뭐야?
In a house, there was an old man watching TV alone. Behind the window it seemed like someone was watching him, and that person knocked on the door. Detective Yang Sang-sik sat at his office desk. At that time, on his desk there was a photo of a student in Hyunju's class. He looked back at the woman's burning case, but the case had been reported closed. He was curious that there was a witness who was told to go home because he was freed from charges. It was a case of an elderly person's death. They called the man for questioning because someone saw him at the scene. But it turned out that the cause was an accident. According to the autopsy report, the cause of death was a stroke. When Detective Sang-sik went to the scene, they didn't put up a police line because it was just an accident. Detective Sang-sik is famous for his sharp observation because he always remembers the faces he has seen and always pays attention to small details. But the cases he handles are never really finished. Even though the arrest rate is high, the resolution rate is low. He came to the case of the death of an elderly person who lived alone. According to them, it was a sudden death, maybe due to acute myocardial infarction. His wife died and his children live abroad, so he lives alone. Sang-sik observes the elderly, and if the cause of death was illness, then there should be signs of great pain and agony. Why did he look so calm? When looking at his cell phone there was also something strange. He contacted his children and grandchildren before he died. Detective Sang-sik reviewed the elderly case report and they felt that an autopsy was not necessary based on the condition and medical records of the deceased. And the family also refused an autopsy. His family did not like the deceased's body being cut. The body had been given to his family, so the case was closed. Because it was still disturbing, Sang-sik checked several Chinese food restaurants that did delivery orders. Until the evening, he found a small restaurant and saw a motorbike used for delivery in a fairly dirty condition. He then went into the restaurant and ordered jjajangmyeon, and he looked around the restaurant and there was a place to put the delivery order. He remembered that the seller was someone who had been acquitted of charges at the police station before. Then Sang-sik asked how he made the delivery and the man replied that he did it. Even though there was no application installed, all customers were looking for ways to order food. Then Sang-sik concluded that his order was delivered without making an order, and this place was too far from the elderly's house. The man confirmed it because jjajangmyeon would become soft, but Sang-sik did not say that the food ordered was jjajangmyeon. From the beginning, Sang-sik felt that the elderly person's death was suspicious. His expression seemed unnatural for death due to illness. He thought it was age spots, but it turned out to be jjajangmyeon sauce. Sang-sik was sure that the man in front of him was the perpetrator, but the man felt belittled, besides that he did not understand what Sang-sik meant. Because he did not understand, Sang-sik felt that there was no other way but to watch him.
그러지.
A month later there was a woman running fast and behind her there was a motorbike that seemed to be chasing her. Then Sang-sik came and knocked down the motorcyclist. He hit the person's head on the asphalt and when his helmet was opened it turned out that he was the seller. Sang-sik felt that he would plan another murder and felt that he was a crazy killer. Then Sang-sik asked the woman if she was okay. The seller was surprised because Sang-sik could see the woman. Then the woman woke up and she was the victim of the apartment fire at that time. It was scary because the woman's eyes were bleeding and the seller felt that the detective had sharp eyes because the woman shouldn't have been there. Then the man tried to escape and Sang-sik tried to catch him again. When he fell, Sang-sik saw his strange eyes like a cat's eyes. Sang-sik entered the light shop and he went there to look for the suspect he was chasing. A man in his mid-30s, 180 tall, short hair. He passed by there, and only this place was open at this late night. Then Sang-sik saw a woman in white carrying a suitcase, dripping with blood. Sang-sik asked if the woman was hurt and she said no, it was her monthly cycle. She entered the shop just to wait for the rain to stop. Then Sang-sik took off his raincoat and gave it to the woman, but the woman was silent. Then he put it on. The woman left the light shop and Sang-sik and Wanyang were left in the shop. Sang-sik seemed interested in Wanyang's shop, but the shop was strange. Then Wanyang asked how Sang-sik got to this place. Sang-sik answered, because only this shop looks bright. But Wanyang asked him to answer, not because the shop is bright, but how did he get to this place? A man works as a doctor and is assisted by a nurse who is in the morgue. While checking the body, the nurse screamed because the body was still alive and making a sound. The doctor told her to calm down because the deceased could hear her. She was not a body, but the deceased, and that was the sound of gas coming out of the deceased's body. Then the doctor told the nurse to rest and respect the deceased. Then the nurse apologized to the deceased. They then took good care of the deceased. And when everything was finished, the doctor asked the nurse to contact her family. When they were alone, suddenly the deceased spoke to the doctor that she should not die like that. Then the doctor asked to let go of everything, leave them, and rest in peace. Many people feel guilty about themselves when they die. Some people take a long time to accept their death, but the deceased felt that they could not accept it because it was not the time. The doctor felt that it was because the deceased was not used to it. The deceased would go to a better place. The doctor asked to rest in peace and they would pick her up when the procedure was complete. When she was put in the corpse storage room, the deceased felt it was too dark there. But the doctor said that she would forget the place completely and feel comfortable. When the doctor closed the storage door, there was a sound of crying from inside the place. Yang Ji took the elevator to her workplace in the ICU room of a hospital. Behind her a man was also waiting to get on the elevator. The man was wearing wet clothes and was about to go up to the 8th floor, but Yang Ji thought visitors were prohibited from going up to the 8th floor at night. She explained that she worked there and the 8th floor only had an ICU room. The man asked if the patient was serious and Yang Ji couldn't be sure because their conditions were all critical. Now it depends on the patient's determination to live. Hearing that, the man cried and the floor suddenly filled with water like a flood. Yang Ji was very scared because the man crying with a lot of tears. Yang Ji asked the man to stop and the water had reached the top and made Yang Ji difficult to breathe. No matter how many times Yang Ji begged to stop, the man still continued crying. And then the elevator reached the 8th floor and the door opened. The water and the man disappeared, and Yang Ji got out of the elevator. Wanyang asked Sang-sik again who he was looking for. Then Sang-sik explained that he was a man in his 30s who was around 180 years old and he also had eyes, strange like a cat. When he explained it, suddenly his own eyes looked strange and Wanyang saw it. The suspect was riding a scooter and the scooter seemed to be passing here, so Sang-sik just followed the voice and arrived here. But Wanyang didn't hear the sound of the scooter and Sang-sik intended to leave the shop. But because it was still raining, Wan Yang told Sang-sik to wait inside the shop until the rain stopped. Maybe the person he was looking for would enter the shop too. The ICU room was quite busy because there were 2 more accident patients with worse conditions. They planned to move the alcoholic patient to the room if he got better, because the ICU room was full. It turned out that the patient had been hospitalized many times because of alcohol addiction, and he still couldn't stop drinking alcohol. The nurses were sure that if he was sent home, he would return to the hospital again with the same condition. Yang Ji asked the senior nurse to take care of the transfer of the alcoholic patient because she wanted to talk to him. Previously, Yang Ji had been in a coma because she was hit by a drunk driver, so she wanted to talk about the impact so that the patient would stop drinking alcohol.
그렇게.
In the middle of the road, Hyunju met a woman carrying a suitcase. They had met before and Hyunju could see her. She asked if Hyunju wanted to buy a light bulb. Hyunju often bought it because it was her mother's order. Then the woman told Hyunju to be careful and Hyunju left her. Yang Ji pushed wheelchair of the alcoholic patient and said that he was in a very dangerous phase. Alcohol addiction triggers liver failure, which can lead to death. Before he lost consciousness and kept rambling, as if seeing something, as if talking to someone. Yang Ji suspected that he saw someone, because seriously ill patients often experience delirium. They can't think clearly and suffer from temporary amnesia. They can't recognize places and people and experience visual and auditory hallucinations. The ICU is like being on the verge of life and death. Many people come in and out. Some are alive and some are dead. And Yang Ji is curious about who he saw. The figure he saw, Yang Ji also saw. Yang Ji had a serious car accident and ended up in the ICU. Her head was injured and she was in a coma. He was neither alive nor dead. She also had delirium at that time, and she almost died, but came back to life. Yang Ji had difficulty adjusting to the world after waking up, because since waking up she saw figures from time to time. The patient was curious about who Yang Ji saw, and Yang Ji answered figures that might be human or not. Sometimes even though she saw them, she couldn't tell the difference. She was often confused whether they were human or not. There were different characteristics from them that difficult to explain. And the person that patient saw was a man who was on the verge of life and death. He was a coma patient who was on the verge of death, so Yang Ji tried whatever she could. Yang Ji chatted with the coma patient and took care of him. Yang Ji remembered a nurse who used to take care of her. She was a senior nurse. She always gave Yang Ji encouragement, and now Yang Ji does the same thing to the patients she takes care of. She plays a song for the patient and asks the patient not to give up. So, if he meets someone who is on the verge of life and death, it means he is also experiencing something similar like Yang Ji. She doesn't know what will happen, but if he keeps meeting them, so, please be careful from now on now. Hyunju was shocked when a man called her. He asked if Hyunju saw a dog. The man couldn't sleep because of the dog's voice. The dog always barked every time he was about to sleep. Was he the only one who heard it? Hyunju felt something was strange about the man. Then she turned on the flashlight and flashed on the man. She had to observe the man to find out, and sure enough, it turned out that the man was the man who had come to the light shop, who was always cold. Hyunju had to pretend not to notice anything strange, and then Hyunju asked permission to go home because her mother was waiting, and the man let her go home. The patients in the hospital experienced changes for the better. Yang Ji thought it might not only be the determination of the patient, but also the determination of other people. And there were not only patients that Yang Ji had seen, but also people who were on the verge of life and death. There was a student with a broken leg, who just sat crying in front of Sian Hei's house. Then there was Sian Hei, who couldn't get out of her house, who was trapped in the house and scared by herself. There was a man who was always cold, who always heard the sound of dogs. Then there was a man who took the bus, whose body was probably put into a suitcase by a woman in white. And it turned out that the policeman was also in a coma. That's why when he met Wan Yang his eyes looked strange. And the nurses took care of the patients in the ICU with enthusiasm, because it's their job. When Hyunju got home, she told her mother what she had just experienced. Hyunju wondered why her mother was lying down without turning on the lights. Was it because Hyunju didn't bring a light bulb when she came home? Hyunju couldn't do anything because she always met strange people who made her afraid to go to the light shop. Then Hyunju apologized to her mother and she promised to buy her a light tomorrow. But her mother just kept quiet and Hyunju felt that her mother's body was very fragrant, and it turned out that her mother was the deceased who was previously in the morgue. Her mother had died and there were flowers around her body in the coffin, so Hyunju smelled the fragrance on her mother's body. And it turned out that the woman carrying the suitcase was peeking behind Hyunju's door. This mystery drama is getting more and more creepy and curious. It turns out that what was initially like a normal human being is a person who is in a coma in the ICU. Let's wait for the next episode of the Light Shop drama on my channel. Those who haven't subscribed can click subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. Thank you.